Hope was never a bright thing inside Stoneheart Fortress. It lived there the way embers lived under ash, dim and stubborn, surviving on almost nothing while boots ground over it day after day. Anastasia Blackwood had learned that hope could be a discipline instead of a feeling, a quiet act of endurance measured in breaths, swallowed words, and tasks completed before dawn. In a place built to erase names, she kept hers alive by repeating it silently with each rung she scrubbed, each ledger she carried, each command she obeyed. She belonged to no one, she told herself, not to the crest burned onto the wall, not to the men who wore it. The fortress crouched on a basalt ridge above the eastern ravines, all iron gates and wind-scoured stone, with narrow windows that admitted light in thin, judgmental slashes. Anastasia spent most days below ground in the archive kitchens, where heat from the copy ovens warped the air and black soot settled into the lines of her palms. The brand on her inner wrist marked her as bond servant property of House Stoneheart, and the old scar under her left shoulder blade marked her as something the household pretended not to notice. They had taken her from the Blackwood border estates when she was 10, then taught her to move without sound, to keep her gaze low, and to answer to girl instead of Anastasia. She did as she was told. She watched. She remembered. By the last week before Blood Moon, the fortress had changed rhythm. Too many riders came and went after midnight. Crates were moved into the lower chapel in relentless numbers. Too many seers in gray veils passed through the east corridor with their eyes unfocused, whispering to men in ash creed medallions. The household guards, once lazy with authority, moved with tight urgency. Fear had entered the mortar. Overseer Marone found her at the wash trough before dawn and struck the wooden rim beside her ear hard enough to split it. "Faster," he said. "The war table needs fresh maps before first bell. If ink dries wrong, you lose supper." Anastasia bowed her head and answered, "Yes, Overseer." He leaned close enough that she smelled old ale and clove smoke. "No one asked for your voice. Move." In the map room, she copied border lines with cramped fingers while two Creed clerks argued over names. They did not bother to lower their voices around servants. Stoneford Pack already surrendered 3 blooded daughters, one said, stacking seals. Still no match. Then the line is thinner than prophecy claimed, said the other. The prime seer insists a Blackwood female lives. Decree says alive until right night. After that, waste disposal. Anastasia's hand halted over the parchment. A blot spread where her pen touched down. The first clerk glanced at her and smiled without warmth. "Careful, girl. That map costs more than your life." She cleaned the stain, finished the copy, and carried the stack to the archive vault beneath the old chapel, where no one watched closely because no one expected a branded servant to read. They had underestimated hunger, not for bread, for truth. The ledger was bound in cracked black leather and hidden behind a false panel in shelf C13, where tax rolls from dead villages should have been. She found it because she had seen Darius Stoneheart himself place it there 3 nights earlier, his ring catching lantern light as he pressed the spring release. She had waited, counting shifts, counting guards, counting courage. Now she pulled it free and open to the marked ribbon. Names filled the page in neat, cruel columns: Blackwood females, maternal lines, locations, status. Beside several names was one red sigil she recognized from chapel stonework: sacrificial priority. Beside others, another notation in older script she could barely parse. She sounded it silently, letter by letter. Mate Severance first. The room seemed to tilt. She was on a floor of stone and ash, and if she breathed too fast, she would be sick across the pages that could kill her. Mate Severance first. They did not just hunt women. They hunted anyone bound to them. They made love into leverage and called it divine order. If they found her, they would not stop at her. If someone ever chose her, If the moon ever tied her to a life outside these walls, that man would die first to teach obedience to everyone watching. This was what they built under prayers and law. This was why the callers had arrived. This was why the seers trembled. She could stay and disappear quietly, or she could run and turn the whole mountain against her. She was afraid. She was still going. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. She closed the ledger, wrapped it in a grain sack, and slid it under kindling in the service cart. When she pushed through the side door, 2 novice acolytes were dragging old Marta, the laundry keeper, by the elbows toward the chapel stairs. Marta's ankle twisted. She cried out once. "She failed blood test," one acolyte muttered. "Then she should be honored," said the other, reciting doctrine with a vacant voice. "The ash chooses clean vessels." Marta saw Anastasia and tried to straighten despite the grip on her arms. "Do not look," she whispered. "Just keep walking." Anastasia kept walking. At the corner, she stopped where they could not see her and pressed her fist to her mouth until the urge to scream passed. The breaking point came an hour later in the lower chapel, where she had been ordered to scrub wax from the ritual dais while heralds rehearsed the public decree. Iron collars lay in velvet-lined trays at the foot of the altar, each one etched with binding runes that glimmered faintly when torchlight hit them. Darius stood above them in dark ceremonial armor, broad-shouldered and composed, his voice smooth enough to pass for mercy. "Read it again," he told the herald captain. The captain unrolled the parchment. "By authority of Darius Stoneheart, regent of the Crest, all packs are commanded to yield any royal blood female to Stoneheart custody alive before blood moon rise. Non-compliance constitutes treason against pack law and moon decree." Darius tapped one collar with a gloved finger. "And if they resist?" "Transport in irons," the captain said. "Public example at first Moonwell." Darius's gaze drifted toward Anastasia without settling on her face. "Good. Fear moves faster than faith." She lowered her head and scrubbed until her knuckles burned. Every muscle in her body had gone cold. At dusk, the fortress prepared for visiting patrols. Kitchens roared, courtyards filled with saddled wolves and shouting grooms. In that noise, a servant could vanish for 3 minutes if she chose the right corridor and did not hesitate. Anastasia took 2 travel biscuits from the scullery shelf, a wool cloak from abandoned laundry, and the ledger from beneath the kindling. She tucked it against her ribs with linen strips, then slipped into the drainage passage behind the smokehouse where runoff channels met the outer cliff. The tunnel stank of wet lime and rot. Water numbed her ankles. She moved by memory and touch, counting left turns against stone carvings worn almost smooth: broken antler, split moon, wolf jaw. Near the final grate, she heard hounds above and froze, heart hammering so hard she thought it might echo. Voices crossed overhead. "Check lower yards," someone called. "Marin says 1 Bond girl missing from chapel roster." "Which one?" "The dark-haired one, Blackwood eyes." She waited until the steps receded, then pried the rusted grate with a broken stoker bar she had hidden weeks ago for no reason she could have explained then and understood perfectly now. The metal shrieked, then gave. Cold mountain rain hit her face like a slap. She ran down scree and thorn scrub, slid twice, tore her palms, got up, kept running. Night took the path. Only intermittent watchfires marked the road below. She cut west toward the trade switchback, where supply wagons slowed at the checkpoint gates. Behind her, somewhere upslope, a horn sounded once, then twice. By full dark, she reached the mountain checkpoint, half crawling through ditch grass as patrol wolves circled the gatehouse with noses to the wind. Lantern lights swung over mud, wheel tracks, and armed sentries. Anastasia saw one open wagon stacked with flour sacks and spare harness under a canvas tilt. A single guard stood by its rear wheel, cloak damp, spear grounded, posture loose in the way of men who had learned to hide danger in stillness. Common soldier insignia, Valewood patch on his sleeve. She did not think. She moved. Anastasia darted from the ditch and threw herself beneath the wagon, pressing flat between axle beams and hanging chains. The soldier pivoted, spear lifting halfway, then stopped when his gaze found her in shadow. Their eyes met for one suspended beat. He had scarred his jaw and rain in his hair, and he looked neither shocked nor cruel. "Name," he said quietly. She swallowed mud and fear. "No name. Please." Boots pounded up the track before he could answer. 3 herald riders in Stoneheart colors rained hard at the checkpoint, one carrying a decree tube and another a tray of iron collars under oiled cloth. The captain shouted to the gate commander, "Search all outbound transport. Order of the Regent. Royal blood female fugitive. Capture alive before blood moon." The soldier by the wagon shifted his stance, blocking the space beneath the chassis with his body as if by accident. When the commander strode over and pointed at the wagon, the soldier saluted and said, "Leave this one. My war widow is inside and fevered. Surgeon marked quarantine." The commander recoiled a fraction. "You have papers?" "Stamped at lower infirmary," the soldier said, steady as stone. "Kane Valewood, 3rd supply line." The lie slid into the night like a blade finding a seam. The commander cursed, waved them through, and turned to bellow new search orders at the patrol line. Under the wagon, Anastasia gripped the ledger through her cloak and listened to wheels begin to move, each turn carrying her farther from Stoneheart walls and deeper into Darius's path. The wagon lurched over ruts, chains clinking inches from her cheek, and Anastasia held herself rigid beneath the axle while mud and cold water soaked through her borrowed cloak. Each turn of the wheel sounded too loud, each shouted order at the checkpoint too close, and she kept one hand flattened over the grain sack at her ribs as if pressure alone could keep the ledger from tearing loose and spilling her death into the road. Boots paced beside her for the first 100 yards. Kane Valewood did not look down again, but she heard the subtle shift in his stride whenever another sentry passed, the way he positioned himself so his body blocked every useful angle. Twice, voices challenged him. Twice he answered in the clipped rhythm of a man accustomed to being obeyed even while wearing a common insignia. "Quarantine wagon. Lower infirmary stamp. Her fever broke an hour ago. She sleeps. Do you want to explain to the surgeon why you opened the canvas?" No one did. Only when the convoy reached the first tree line did his pace fall back. A gloved hand appeared near the wheel well, palm up, offering a folded blanket and a canteen without a word. Anastasia stared at it a beat too long, then took both. The canteen tasted of iron, pine, and clean mountain water. Her throat burned with relief. "You can breathe now," he said quietly, still facing forward. "Not loudly, just enough." She almost laughed at that, and nearly sobbed instead. She kept quiet, as he had asked. Rain thickened as they descended through the pass. Through gaps in the canvas she saw torchlight snaking along the mountain road, then fading behind them as the Stoneheart checkpoint vanished into the dark. She had dreamed of this moment so many times that freedom should have felt sharp and bright. Instead, it felt like standing on a thawing river, hearing cracks form beneath the ice. By dawn, the convoy reached a high saddle cut into black granite, where standing stones marked a border she had only seen on maps. Each pillar was carved with an old moon sigil crossed by a wolf's crown, not Stoneheart's broken fang crest, and the sentries there wore ash-gray cloaks, pinned with silver thread rather than iron medallions. Their eyes tracked every wheel, every rider, every breath in the cold air. No slouching, no drunken shouting. Discipline lived here. Kane called the halt code before the lead driver could speak. One border captain strode over, rain beating on the fur at her collar, and Anastasia heard the low murmur of formal challenge. State cargo and blood rank. 3rd supply line. Grain, lamp oil, field wraps. One war widow under quarantine, mine by oath. A pause followed, longer than it should have. Anastasia risked lifting the canvas edge. The captain's gaze had settled on Kane's face with the recognition of someone biting back a salute. "Proceed to Eastern Infirmary," the captain said. "Direct clearance." Kane inclined his head once, not as an equal, not as a subordinate either. The wagon rolled again. Exhaustion came in waves now, thick and blinding. Her shoulders shook without permission. Her wrists throbbed where old lash scars had reopened in the scramble through the drainage tunnel, and every breath rubbed raw skin at her ribs where the ledger corners had bruised her. She told herself not to faint. She had endured too much to collapse on the first road out. The convoy entered a valley fortress built against the mountain rather than above it. Terraces of dark timber and stone wrapped around a central yard where smith fires burned in covered pits. Wolves moved everywhere, in armor and work leathers, hauling crates, sharpening blades, carrying stretchers toward long canvas treatment tents on the eastern side. It was a war camp masquerading as a settlement, and the steadiness of it unsettled her more than chaos ever had. Stoneheart had taught fear through unpredictability. This place taught it through competence. The wagon finally stopped beside a low infirmary awning striped in weathered blue. Kane dropped to one knee at the rear wheel and lifted the canvas just enough for her to crawl out unseen. When her boots touched ground, her legs gave way. He caught her before she hit the mud, one arm braced across her back, the other under her elbow, firm without force. Up close, he smelled of cedar smoke and rain-soaked wool. She hated that she noticed. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes." The word came out thin. He accepted it anyway. They crossed the yard in a narrow corridor of his making, Kane placing himself between her and every curious glance. Anastasia kept her hood low, but she still felt eyes snag on her branded wrist when the cloak shifted. A boy carrying bandages slowed and stared openly at the mark. An older medic touched the boy's shoulder and steered him on, expression shuddered and sympathetic in equal measure. Inside the infirmary tent, heat struck her face from braziers lined with herbs. The air smelled of feverfew, crushed juniper, and old blood scrubbed from canvas floors. Cots filled both sides, occupied by wounded scouts, two burned blacksmiths, and a mother humming over a sleeping child in the far corner. The ordinary tenderness of that scene hit Anastasia like a blow. No one here dragged the child away for testing. No one recited doctrine over him. A healer with silver hair braided tight down her back approached them, eyes sharp as winter glass. "Name," Kane answered first. "Lena Valewood. My widow by oath. Caught in the pass when raiders torched the rear line." The healer's gaze moved to Anastasia's face. She did not challenge the lie, but she did not believe it either. "Sit," the healer said. "If you fall, I will still treat you, but I dislike wasted movement." Anastasia sat. The healer cut away the worst of the wet bandages at Anastasia's wrists and hissed softly at the damage. "These are old restraint injuries reopened by strain. Back too." Anastasia's shoulders went rigid. Kane's voice softened, almost inaudible. "You're safe in this tent." Safety. The word had no shape she trusted. Yet she turned, fingers trembling, and let the healer inspect the slash across her shoulder and the torn skin along her spine where stone had scraped her on the escape tunnel wall. "We need clean water and privacy screen," the healer said. "You, Valewood, stay. If she bolts, I am too old to chase." She walked away before Anastasia could object. Kane moved to the washstand and returned with a basin, linen, and salve. He set them down with precise care, as if every small sound mattered. Outside the tent, a war horn called from the western wall, low and sustained. No one inside panicked. They had heard worse. "Why did you do it?" Anastasia asked, voice rough. "At the gate." He met her gaze. Because they brought collars. That is not enough. It was enough for me. The answer should have angered her. Instead, it left a dangerous ache behind her ribs. She looked away first. The healer drew the privacy screen and pointed at the basin. Wash her back. Slow. If she goes pale, stop. I'll return after rounds. Then it was only the two of them in the muted glow of brazier light, separated from the rest of the tent by canvas and a silence that seemed to listen. Anastasia eased the cloak from her shoulders and untied the torn shift at her neck, bearing bruised skin and old scars she had never offered anyone willingly. Shame rose, familiar as breathing. Cain did not stare. He wrung out the linen and touched the first cut with painstaking gentleness, cleaning grit and dried blood from flesh that burned at contact. She counted breaths to stay still. 1, 2, 3. His hand was steady. The cloth moved lower, then up again, tracing the edge of the crescent scar beneath her left shoulder blade, the mark she had carried since childhood without knowing why. The moment his fingers brushed that scar, heat punched through her chest. It was not fever, not pain. A living surge, bright and wild, racing along her bones like stormlight finding metal. Her lungs seized. The tent blurred at the edges. Scent crashed over her in layers so vivid she nearly reeled. Cedar smoke, rain on hot stone, winter fur, the clean metallic note of wolf power held in check by will alone. A taut silver pull snapped between them, chest to chest, invisible and undeniable, as if some ancient bowstring had been drawn and hooked through her heart. Cain inhaled sharply. When she looked at him, his composure had fractured for the first time. His eyes flashed gold, molten and fierce, and something older than language looked out from behind them. He dropped to one knee in front of her, as if struck there, linen falling forgotten from his hand. Mine, he said under his breath, the word reverent and unwilling all at once, dragged from a place he had guarded for years. The canvas walls seemed too thin to hold the force of what had just happened. Anastasia gripped the cot frame until her knuckles blanched, every instinct in her body narrowing to him, to that impossible pull, to the raw certainty unfolding in her blood. The animal part of her went rigid, aware, answering. Her skin thrummed where his hand had touched. Terror and longing collided so hard she could not separate them. No. No, no, no. The ledger line burned across her memory in red ink. Mate severance first. She saw it as clearly as if the page were pinned to the tent wall. Names, bloodlines, execution order. She saw Darius's gloved finger tapping iron collars. Fear moves faster than faith. She saw a blade at Cain's throat because of her. She saw his body on a ritual floor while Creed wolves watched her break. The tight knot behind her ribs loosened and then cinched tighter in the same breath. She had escaped one cage only to find another built from something holy. Cruel symmetry. Cain lifted his head slowly, gold fading to storm dark brown at the edges, but the intensity in his gaze did not dim. He looked stunned, angry at himself for being stunned, and fiercely protective in a way that made her want to step closer and run at once. Across the screen, someone laughed at a joke she could not hear. A child coughed. A healer called for more boiling water. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Inside their small circle of lamplight, nothing was ordinary anymore. Anastasia's pulse hammered against the scar beneath his fingers. She knew, with cold precision, what came next if she let this truth breathe in public. Witnesses, rumors, scent recognition, hunters changing targets by sunset. Darius would not need prophecy to find them. He would follow the bond itself. Cain opened his mouth, as if to speak her false name or her real one. She could not tell. She held his gaze and felt the silver line between them draw tighter, humming like a live wire stretched across a battlefield. The silver line between them sang, and Anastasia made her choice in the space of one heartbeat. She shoved the basin with her foot hard enough to slosh water across the canvas floor, then raised her voice so it carried beyond the privacy screen. "Do not kneel to me," she said, every word clipped like ice. "You touched a scar. That is all. I feel nothing." The laughter outside died. Someone shifted a cot. The healer's steps paused, then resumed, deliberate and brisk, as if she had decided not to hear what she had clearly heard. Kane did not rise at once. He stayed on one knee, eyes fixed on her face, and she watched him understand the lie and accept it anyway. That was the worst part. Not that he believed her, that he did not, and still gave her the mercy of pretending. When he stood, he stepped back first. No reaching, no command voice, no challenge. "As you wish," he said, pitched for the tent to hear. "My mistake." He turned toward the screen and called, calm and formal. "Healer, I need fresh linen. I spilled your wash." The healer returned with 2 apprentices and a look that sliced between them like a blade looking for weakness. Anastasia forced her breathing steady while hands checked her pulse, wrapped her shoulder, and tied new bandages around her wrists. No one asked about kneeling. No one used the word mate. In a camp built on hierarchy, silence could be a shield. Kane gave her that shield and took nothing in exchange. She expected him to disappear after that, offended or angry, and she almost wanted him to. Anger was familiar terrain. It had rules. Instead, he stayed through the end of triage, answering practical questions, signing her under the false widow name, arranging a transfer to a smaller tent near the inner braziers where the wind did not cut through seams. When one apprentice reached for Anastasia's branded wrist with visible disgust, Kane caught the tray from her hand before it hit the floor and said, mild as snowfall, "You will not look at her like that again." The apprentice reddened, muttered an apology, and focused on her work. Outside, sleet had started needling against the tent roofs, and the valley sank into that hard mountain gray where even daylight felt rationed. Kane walked her to the new tent, carrying her wet cloak over one arm and never touching her unless she stumbled. At the doorway, he handed over dry socks, a thicker blanket, and a wooden cup of broth he must have bartered from the cooks. "I can feed myself," she said. "I know." He left the cup on the crate beside her cot anyway, and moved to the flap. Then he stopped, as if measuring an internal line, and looked back. "When panic hits," he said quietly, "count 4 in, hold 4, 6 out. Keep your hand on something solid. Cot frame works. Floorboards work. Your own sternum works." He tapped his chest once. "If your hands shake, press your thumb to each fingertip and count backward from 10. It gives your body a task that is not fear." Anastasia stared at him. "How do you know that?" His mouth moved, not quite a smile. "I trained soldiers who shook before first blood. I was one of them once." He did not add details. He did not ask for hers. After he left, she sat with the cup cooling in her hands and tried to make sense of him. She had spent years learning the grammar of cruelty. Kindness offered in public, punishment delivered in private, help with a ledger attached, gentleness as bait before ownership. Kane's behavior refused that grammar. No demand followed his care, no reminder of debt. No hand closed around her throat in the name of protection. The uncertainty was its own kind of vertigo. "I do not trust this. I cannot trust this. If I trust this, I hand him a blade and bare my neck. If I refuse it, I drown in my own vigilance and call that survival. I am so tired of choosing between cages. I am so tired of being the only wall between danger and whoever stands near me. If the bond is real, Darius will hunt him first. The ledger made that clear. So I will be cold. I will be sharp. I will be unlovable on purpose. Let him hate me if he must. Hatred might keep him alive." The broth trembled as she lifted it. She counted her breaths the way he had taught her. 4 in. Hold. 6 out. Again. By the 5th cycle, the tremor in her left hand eased. She woke from a fractured sleep to find a covered plate on the crate, still warm under cloth, and a pair of dry boots placed neatly beneath her cot. Beside them lay a small carved wolf token, whittled from pale wood, its ears uneven and one paw too large. No name, no note. The carving lines were rough in places, as if made quickly with a field knife between duties. She turned it over twice and found only a thumb-worn groove along the spine. He had left before she woke, and relief arrived braided with disappointment she refused to examine. Before the warmth left the plate, orders moved through camp like a tightening wire, transfers east, reserve lines forward, all disputed civilians to border garrison review. Anastasia rode in a covered cart with 3 supply chests and 1 medic escort, the ledger hidden now in a stitched pocket inside her new boot, where no routine search would look first. Kane rode alongside for the first leg, then peeled off to answer a summons she did not hear. She told herself she did not watch him go. She lied badly. The border garrison at Frostgate was less a fortress than a choke point carved into cliff and ice, with narrow switchback roads, iron teeth set into the walls, and 6 watchtowers angled to kill anything that approached in formation. They processed traitors, scouts, deserters, and rumors with equal suspicion. By the time her cart rolled under the gate arch, wind had risen to a blade and every conversation sounded like an argument. A lieutenant with a scarred chin checked her transit slate, then read the false widow name aloud with a frown that deepened when he saw her wrist. Brand marked. Unverified bloodline. You expect me to sign this through on a field lie? The medic escort held out the seal tube. Orders from Valley Command. The lieutenant snapped the tube shut without opening it. Orders can be forged. We had 2 cult lures last month, both carrying stolen seals. His gaze cut to Anastasia. Hands where I can see them. She complied. Old reflex. Chin down, shoulders narrow, becomes smaller than the threat. Chain her for transport, he said to the guard detail. The first guard took a step forward with restraint irons. Anastasia's pulse kicked hard, body already mapping exits that did not exist in a stone inspection bay with 1 door and 6 armed wolves. The memory of collars on velvet flashed so sharply she tasted bile. Do not touch her. Kane's voice cracked across the room before she saw him. He strode in from the inner corridor still in travel leathers, wet from sleet, jaw set hard enough to cut glass. He had not changed insignia. He still wore common soldier rank on his shoulder. The lieutenant looked irritated rather than alarmed. This is garrison authority, the lieutenant said. Stand down. Kane took position between Anastasia and the irons, feet planted, hands at his sides. I invoke the soldier's shelter clause. Witnessed, dependent under my oath receives protection from restraint absent tribunal charge. The lieutenant barked a humorless laugh. That clause is ceremonial. It is law, Kane said. Older than your post and mine. Law bends at war. Not this one. Tension tightened the room until even the torchlight seemed to hold still. Anastasia watched 6 guards angle their bodies, uncertain whether they were containing her or him. Kane did not reach for a weapon. He did not need to. Authority radiated off him in controlled waves, the kind that made trained fighters reassess odds without understanding why. The lieutenant's expression shifted from annoyance to calculation. You are out of line, Valewood. Then write me up. I will do better than that. He signaled the duty sergeant. Punitive stripes, immediate. Maybe pain will remind him who gives orders here. Anastasia stepped forward before she could stop herself. No, I will go in chains. Do not do this for me. Kane did not look back. You are under my protection. Stay behind me. 2 guards seized his arms. The sergeant produced a rank lash, braided leather weighted at the tip for sting rather than maiming. The first strike landed across Kane's back with a crack that flinched half the room. He absorbed it without sound. The second drove him one pace forward. He reset his stance and remained where he was, still between Anastasia and the irons. By the fourth, red lines showed through torn fabric. By the sixth, even the lieutenant seemed uneasy. "Enough," Kane said, breath controlled though rougher now. Record 6 executed. Clause still stands. The lieutenant swore and slammed the ledger slate against the table. "Formal grievance before War Council, then. I want this challenge buried in precedent by nightfall." "Good," Kane replied. "Put it on record." The irons never touched her. They held Kane for disciplinary lock while scribes drafted the grievance packet, and Anastasia was assigned a side room under watch until council review. No one offered comfort. No one needed to. The fact of him standing there, taking punishment without yielding her, had already done something she did not yet know how to name. Hours crawled behind frosted slit windows. A clerk arrived, eyes tired, and read the ruling in clipped legal cadence. Provisional recognition of shelter clause pending full council hearing. Protected dependent not to be shackled without direct evidence of hostile intent. Lieutenant Harrow censured for procedural breach. The clerk looked faintly surprised by his own words, as if he had expected the opposite. Kane was released shortly after, shoulders rebandaged, expression unreadable. He met her in the corridor outside the holding room, where torchlight painted bronze along the stone and wind moaned through the gate seams. "You should not have done that," she said, voice low. He leaned one shoulder against the wall, careful of the fresh dressings. "They were never going to stop at chains. Once fear gets a uniform, it starts calling itself policy." She swallowed. "You could have lost rank. I have lost worse." Something in the way he said it told her this was not rhetoric. It was history. For a long moment neither of them moved. Guards passed at the far end of the corridor, boots ringing, conversation fading around the bend. Kane kept his distance, as he always did now, as if he had drawn a line around her choices and sworn not to cross it. That restraint, repeated until it became pattern, was harder to dismiss than any declaration. Anastasia looked down at her hands. The right still held the carved wolf token in her palm, worn smooth from hours she had pretended not to spend tracing its rough edges. "I lied in the infirmary," she said, barely above a whisper. "Not because I wanted to humiliate you. Because the ledger I stole says mates of my line are executed first, ritual priority, publicly. I thought if I denied it fast enough, hard enough, maybe the bond would not mark you as target." Kane's gaze stayed on her face, steady and unsparing. "Thank you for telling me." No accusation, no triumph. Just that. She let out a breath she felt in her bones. "I still do not know how to trust this. Any of it. You do not need to give me all of it." His tone gentled without softening. "Give me the next step." Anastasia hesitated, then closed the distance by a single pace, enough to share warmth in the cold corridor. Not surrender, not promise, a beginning. "The next step," she said, "is you letting the healer change those bandages before they stick." A real smile touched his mouth, brief and tired and startlingly human. Command accepted. When he pushed off the wall, she moved with him instead of away. He guided her toward the infirmary arch, and she matched his pace until a runner in council gray skidded into their path, breath steaming in the corridor cold. Valewood, the command table, now, bring the woman. Kane's jaw tightened. Report. Raven from Northwatch. Seal priority crimson. They said she has to hear it with witnesses. He did not touch Anastasia, but the shift of his body asked a question. She answered by stepping beside him, and the three of them moved through Frostgate's inner spine of stone halls, past armory doors and map alcoves, where officers went abruptly quiet when they saw her branded wrist. The command chamber sat above the western gate, a long room of slate tables and iron braziers. Wind rattled the shutters. 6 officers stood around a spread of border maps pinned with black and red markers, and at the head of the table sat Commander Isra Vale, silver at her temples, scars crossing both hands like old script. A seer in gray veil waited near the hearth, wrists unbound, but flanked by 2 guards. On the table lay a crystal lens the size of a fist, clouded with smoke. Isra looked from Cain to Anastasia. "Close the door." It was Cain who answered first. "What happened?" Isra tapped the lens. Corrupted vision broadcast from the eastern Lawstone chain. Repeated in 4 packs before dawn patrol. Her eyes came to Anastasia and stayed there, not unkind, not soft. "You are in it." The seer lifted the crystal with trembling fingers and spoke an activation phrase in Old Moon tongue. Smoke inside the lens brightened, then spilled a projected lattice of pale light above the table. Anastasia saw herself, or a version built to resemble her, standing over a withered field while wolves collapsed around her. A voice she did not recognize chanted, "Daughter of Blackwood brings famine. Daughter of Blackwood brings wolf madness. Deliver her before blood moon and the packs will be spared." The image shattered into static ash. No one in the room breathed for a full second. "Forgery," the seer said, voice ragged. "A skilled one. They braided true blood signatures into false futures. Most civilians cannot tell the difference under panic conditions." Isra slid a dispatch tube across the table. Cain broke the seal, scanned, then handed it to Anastasia. The message was brief and brutal. 2 border hamlets had surrendered women with Blackwood ancestry to Stoneheart heralds after the vision spread. One had offered a mother and adult daughter in chains to avoid sanctions. The second had already sent riders carrying collars. Anastasia felt the room narrow. "Darius did this." Isra's gaze sharpened. "You know his method?" Anastasia reached into her boot, pulled the folded ledger page from its stitched hiding pocket, and flattened it on the slate. Names, sigils, notes in red. She turned the page so they could all read the line that had haunted every breath since she stole it. "Mate severance first." Cain's fingers flexed once at his side. He did not interrupt. "He is not collecting hostages for ransom," Anastasia said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "He is preparing an eclipse rite at the Temple of Hollow Moon. The blood goes into ruined braziers. The seers force a broadcast through Lost Stones. If he uses royal line blood as the anchor and completes inversion, every bonded pair in range feels pain unless they submit. That is what this means." She tapped the notation beside 3 crossed-out names. "Obedience chain protocol. He kills mates first, so no one dares resist." The chamber erupted in overlapping argument. That right is myth. Myth does not explain the Lawstone interference. If the girl is the key, we hand her over and cut the fuse. Cain stepped forward, and silence hit like a dropped blade. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "No." One officer bristled. "You are a third-line soldier speaking over command." Isra lifted a hand before Cain could answer. "And yet, he has been right at every turn this week." "Continue." Cain looked at Anastasia, then at the map. "Darius wants us to think this is a hunt. It is theater. He needs a public surrender before Blood Moon, so fear does the recruitment for him. If we give him his stage, we lose the Lawstone network and the packs with it. If we protect her, we force him to expose his right early, on ground we can contest." Isra studied him for a long beat, then nodded once. "We move to contingency blackglass. No surrender. No transport records with her true identity. Restricted circle only." Anastasia exhaled slowly, not relief exactly, but a reprieve bought in minutes. As they turned to logistics, another runner arrived with a sealed strip from Valley Command. Isra read it, and for the first time that night, uncertainty crossed her face. "Darius has declared Cain Valewood a traitor to Pack law," she said. "And any garrison sheltering him is now a lawful target." The room shifted again, not merely tense now but war-ready. Orders snapped out. Gate rotations doubled, inner sentries recalled. The brazier light threw hard shadows over the map pins, and every red marker suddenly looked like an opening move. By second bell that night, Frostgate had become a clenched fist. Kane found Anastasia in the infirmary annex where the healer was changing his back dressings. He sat shirtless on a stool, shoulders striped with fresh salve and linen, while she stood by the shelf grinding willow bark she did not need to grind. The healer, efficient and unimpressed by emotional storms, tied the final knot and said, "If either of you tears these bandages in the next hour, I will personally assign you both to latrine duty." She left before either could answer. The room warmed under banked coals and herb steam, quieter than command, quieter than fear for a fleeting moment. Kane reached for his shirt and winced as fabric caught on gauze. Anastasia crossed the space without thinking and took the hem from him. "Hold still." He went still at once. She eased the cloth over his shoulders in careful increments, fingers brushing skin heated by healing salve. The bond line pulsed between them, less like a shock now, and more like a current that had learned their names. He watched her with that same deliberate restraint, giving her room, never pretending indifference. "You should hate me a little," she said, fastening the leather tie at his collar. "It would simplify things." "Would it?" "Yes. I would know my role." His mouth curved, brief and rueful. "You are not a role." The words landed harder than any command she had survived. "I am still waiting for the price. That is what fear has done to me. I catalog kindness and search for the trap. I measure every silence for the sound of a chain. He keeps standing where pain is, as if his body has decided this is the only honest language left. I want to lean into that steadiness until the noise in my head goes quiet. I want to run before wanting can be used against him. Both things are true at once, and I do not know how to live in that contradiction without breaking something we have not even named." Outside, bootsteps accelerated in the corridor. Inside, Kane lowered his voice. "Council will pressure you tomorrow. They will call sacrifice strategy. Some of them will mean it. Some will just be afraid." "Are you?" "Constantly." He held her gaze. "I am not afraid of you." Before she could answer, Isra's aide appeared in the doorway. "Commander requests both of you at lower archive. We found a match to her ledger notation." The archive room beneath Frostgate smelled of lamp oil, dust, and thawing stone. Old war records lined the walls in waxed bundles. A clerk had opened 3 volumes on a central table, each containing references to the Temple of Hollow Moon and partial diagrams of understructures beneath the dais. Anastasia bent over the maps, pulse quickening for a different reason now. "These catacomb marks are wrong in the newer copies," she said. "Stoneheart redrafted them." She traced a faint line on the oldest sheet. "This passage runs from servant storage to Moonwell subchamber. Hidden access." Isra leaned in. "Can you walk it blind?" "Yes," Kane answered at the same time. "Then we plan around it." They worked until the lamps burned low, translating old script, cross-referencing crest marks, identifying where Darius would place ritual guards if he expected frontal assault. Every answer created 2 new risks. Every risk demanded people they did not have. Yet momentum gathered, disciplined and relentless, as if naming the architecture of terror reduced it from nightmare to problem set. Then the first explosion hit. It came from the outer east wall, a concussive thud that shook dust from beams and sent every lamp flame flat. A second blast followed, closer, and alarm bells screamed through the garrison. Someone shouted, "Ash Creed breach at Supply Court." Isra snapped into command voice. "Seal Gate 3. Evacuate non-combatants to lower tunnels. Valewood, with me. Anastasia, archive lock and move." Kane turned to her, and the room narrowed to his face in the flicker strobe of emergency lamps. "Go to Tunnel Access C. Take whoever is routed there. Do not wait for me at the first bend." "Do not order me. Then hear me." His tone cut, urgent and bare. If they take you, they take everyone tied to these stones. Move! Steel clashed in the corridor beyond. Smoke seeped under the archive door, acrid and immediate. Anastasia grabbed the oldest temple map, shoved it into her coat, and ran. Frostgate had transformed into controlled chaos. Guards flooding stairs, medics hauling supply trunks, civilians redirected in fast lines by shouting sergeants. Kane peeled toward the east breach with 12 fighters at his back. Anastasia saw him only once more before the crowd swallowed him, amber edging his irises as the predator surfaced beneath command discipline. At Tunnel Access C, 2 quartermasters were ushering a cluster of evacuees through a narrow stone hatch. Among them were 5 children recovered that morning from a raided servant caravan, wrapped in oversized blankets, faces smudged but alert. One little boy clutched a wooden spoon like a weapon and refused to let go of an older girl's sleeve. "This route stable?" Anastasia asked. "Collapsed years back past second turn," a quartermaster said, "but engineer reopened emergency crawl last winter. Passable single file." Another impact shuddered the ceiling. Dust rained down. Far above, wolves roared challenge calls, answered by harsh horn blasts from the attacking side. Anastasia crouched to the children's eye level. "You stay with me. Hold the rope. No one lets go." The older girl lifted her chin. "We can do that." They moved into the passage, quartermaster lanterns throwing swinging light across wet stone. The tunnel smelled of minerals and old earth, colder with every step. Behind them, the hatch slammed shut, muting the battle to a distant, relentless thunder. Halfway through the second bend, a messenger squeezed past from the opposite direction, soot-streaked and panting. He caught Anastasia's arm just long enough to deliver the words that turned fear into ice. Valewood held the archive corridor. Creed assassins bypassed East Wall and went for him directly. They are inside the inner ring. He was gone before she could question him. The rope in her hand jerked as the children kept moving, trusting the path she had chosen. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed toward blackness. Behind, Frostgate shook with impacts and fire, and somewhere above stone and smoke, Kane stood between assassins and the heart of the garrison, while she disappeared into the mountain with 5 small hands tied to her survival. The rope jerked again in Anastasia's palm, 5 small grips trusting the knot line in the dark, and she forced her voice to stay level. "Eyes on my lantern. Step where I step." The older girl nodded, jaw set with a courage no child should need. The quartermaster at the rear counted under his breath to keep spacing, while stone dust sifted from the tunnel ceiling in thin, steady streams. Another impact rolled through the mountain, muffled but heavy enough to make the lantern flame buckle sideways. At the next alcove, Anastasia saw a low iron door half hidden behind calcite curtains. The old map in her coat flashed in her mind, one faded mark she had barely trusted. Cistern chamber. Secondary vent to Goat Path. "This way," she said. The quartermaster frowned. "Route C continues forward. Forward narrows to a crawl drop. Children will panic in that choke." She pointed to the iron door. "There is an air shaft behind this. It exits above the lower stables. Faster, safer." He hesitated, warred between protocol and urgency, then shoved the bar latch. Rust screamed, and cold air knifed through the gap. Beyond lay a shallow chamber with dry stone benches and an old pulley ladder fixed to the wall. Not comfortable, defensible. "Get them inside," Anastasia said. "Seal it after me." The little boy with the wooden spoon clung to her sleeve. "You are coming." Her chest tightened. "I am right behind you." It was the first promise she had made that day she was not sure she could keep. He accepted it anyway, and stepped through. The quartermasters moved fast, children in, packs in, bar reset. Then boots scraped in the main tunnel behind her, many of them, synchronized and unhurried in a way that announced confidence rather than pursuit. Ash Creed hunters did not run when the trap was already closed. Anastasia lifted the lantern and backed toward the cistern door as 6 wolves in black lacquered leathers rounded the bend, masks at their throats, obsidian chains looped at their belts. The lead enforcer smiled when he saw her. "Royal blood," he said, almost pleased. "Regent wants you breathing." She swung the lantern hard into the nearest wall. Oil burst and fire licked up the damp stone in a bright sheet, forcing the front pair to recoil. She dropped low, slid under a grasping arm, and drove her shoulder into the cistern bar as the quartermaster hauled from inside. The door slammed between them with a crack that snapped fingers clear just in time. Steel rang against iron as hunters hit it from the other side. "Ladder," she told the quartermasters. "Take them up. Go now." "What about you?" "If they breach here, they follow you into a vertical shaft with children on it. I am not giving them that line." The older quartermaster grabbed her forearm once, hard and grateful, then turned and started the climb, guiding one child at a time. Anastasia dragged 2 stone benches across the door and braced the bar with an old pump handle. Impacts boomed through iron. Splinters of rust jumped like sparks. I am not calm. I am not brave. I am counting because counting keeps my hands useful. 1 strike, 2, 3. The bar bends at 7. The hinge goes at 9. I can hear my pulse in my teeth, and still I am choosing this. Not because I have no fear, because fear has been choosing for me since I was 10, and I am done letting it write the ending. On the 10th hit, the lower hinge sheared, the door buckled inward a hand span. A new voice cut through the clash, smooth as polished bone. "Enough." Silence dropped outside so abruptly it felt staged. The broken panel eased open, and Darius Stoneheart stepped into the lantern haze in ceremonial black. Rain still glistening on his cloak clasp, as if he had come from a formal audience rather than an active siege. 2 heralds flanked him, and behind them Anastasia saw a line of collared prisoners from Frostgate's staff, kneeling but unhurt, guarded at spear point. Darius looked at the barricade, then at her face, and his smile sharpened. "You always did make work for simple men." Rage flared hot enough to steady her. "You burned a garrison to steal 1 woman. I started a war to reveal a queen who keeps hiding in servant doors." His gaze slid to the ladder shaft where the last child's boots vanished upward. "You can force me to tear this chamber apart, or you can walk and keep everyone in it untouched." Anastasia held his eyes for 3 full breaths. "Where?" "The Temple of Hollow Moon. Your blood has an appointment." Less than 20 minutes after she had entered the tunnel, she stepped out of it in chains by her own decision, because the children were already above ground and moving under quartermaster escort toward the western ridges, and because Darius had wanted panic while she intended to give him witnesses. He marched her through a concealed postern below Frostgate's east wall, where cult wagons waited in blackout canvas. Smoke smeared the sky. At the breach line, Cain's war cry sounded once, deep enough to vibrate through stone, followed by the answering roar of wolves who would not yield their gate. Darius heard it too, and glanced at her with cool amusement. He still thinks this fight is about walls. By the time they reached the temple approach, the blood moon had climbed above the ridgeline, vast and red over ancient steps cut into white rock. Pack banners crowded the lower terraces, drawn by forged visions and real fear. Thousands of eyes turned toward the central dais where ruined braziers were already lit. Chained seers ringed the moonwell lattice, veils soaked with sweat. Darius lifted his hand, and herald horns carried his command over the assembly. "Behold the famine bride, behold the blood key." He dragged her to the dais and locked an obsidian chain around her throat, tight enough to force stillness, not enough to choke. The metal drank heat from her skin. Around the temple, cult wolves closed ranks while allied packs shouted conflicting orders, one spark away from slaughter. Then the outer gate exploded inward. Cain came through the smoke at the head of the Frostgate line, claws bared in a partial shift, Amber threaded through his irises like fire through glass. He did not look like a common soldier anymore. He looked like a verdict. The wolves at his flanks bowed their heads for one instinctive second, even while fighting, recognition stronger than command. Darius laughed softly. "There is our hidden king." Chaos surged. Steel struck stone. Braziers flared as first blood hit the runes. Darius sliced Anastasia's palm with a ritual blade and pressed it over the invocation channel carved into the altar. Pain flashed bright, then focused. He began chanting old inversion verses, each word feeding the law stone lattice above them. Around the terraces, bonded pairs doubled over, clutching their chests as the first pulse of forced agony shivered through the network. Anastasia tasted iron and ash and made her choice. Not flight, not silence, not another lie offered to protect someone by erasing herself. She slammed her bleeding hand flat onto the Moonwell sigil instead of the channel and shouted in Blackwood tongue, voice carrying across stone and war alike. "I am Anastasia Blackwood. I rejected my mate to save his life. I will not reject him again." The lattice overhead snapped from red to silver white, and every crystal in the temple sang. Seers jerked upright as if yanked from deep water. The false vision threads wavered. Anastasia spoke faster, old grammar returning from childhood lessons whispered by kitchen fires and punished out of her by Stoneheart doctrine. She reversed the root verbs of obedience into witness, submission into consent, blood price into blood right. The runes resisted like locked joints. She pushed harder. A wall she had not known she still carried gave way behind her ribs. Not fragility. Authority. Silver fire erupted from the Moonwell and raced through each brazier in a ring of light that knocked cult enforcers backward. The agony pulse in the bonded wolves broke mid-wave. On the terraces, gasping pairs lifted their heads, stunned and suddenly clear-eyed. Darius snarled and yanked the chain at her throat. "Stop!" "No." He drove for the altar blade. Anastasia pivoted, wrapped the chain around her forearm, and used his momentum to wrench him offline, just enough for the blade to skid across stone. He recovered with a feral speed, claws half-surfaced and struck for her chest. Cain hit him from the side before the blow landed, and all three crashed against the dais steps in a tangle of chain and limbs and runic light. Cain rose first, blood at his temple, shoulders heaving, power rolling off him in brutal, controlled waves. Darius spat, staggered up, and reached again for the blade now lying near Anastasia's knee. Their eyes met across it. "Your blood was meant to kneel," Darius said, voice shredded but venomous. Anastasia kicked the blade up, caught its hilt, and leveled it at his throat. "My blood remembers how to rule." He lunged anyway. She cut the chain linking her collar to his gauntlet, and as the severed length snapped back, the recoil rune he had primed for her completed its loop on the nearest living anchor. Him. Obsidian links coiled around his chest and arms, pinning him to the altar pillar as the Moonwell fire flooded the crest mark branded over his sternum. He screamed once, more fury than pain, and thrashed against bindings that only tightened. Cain stepped in, palm blazing amber against Darius's crest. "For every name you burned." The crest shattered under his hand in a burst of gold-black sparks. Darius went still, eyes wide with disbelief first, then emptiness, and slid down the pillar to the temple floor. The horns stopped. One by one, weapons lowered. For a suspended moment, the only sound was Anastasia's breath and the hiss of silver fire receding into the Moonwell channels. Then the chained seers began to weep. Not from terror now, but release, and the nearest pack leaders dropped to one knee facing the dais, not to Cain, not to Darius's corpse, but to Anastasia standing bloodied and upright with the broken obsidian collar hanging open at her throat. Cain turned to her, chest rising hard, gaze stripped of everything except truth. He knelt in the ash at her feet in front of every watching clan and bowed his head. This time, Anastasia did not deny him. She stepped down from the dais through ash and shattered runestone, took Cain by the shoulders, and asked in a voice meant for him and every witness who had bled for this moment, "Do you still choose me, knowing exactly what my name costs?" Cain lifted his head. Blood traced one line from his temple to his jaw, and his breath still came hard from battle. Yet his answer held the steadiness that had carried her out of cages and corridors alike. "I chose you when you had no safe name to give. I choose you now as Anastasia Blackwood. I will keep choosing you when the crowns come with knives." Around them, pack leaders waited in charged silence while seers cut one another free from chains. Commander Isra climbed the lower steps with two guards, carrying the old temple law tablet wrapped in cloth. She stopped at the moonwell edge and bowed, not deeply, but unmistakably. "Royal claim bond must be completed in the spring chamber," she said. "By consent, witnessed. No compulsion, no right without both voices." Anastasia glanced at the broken obsidian collar at her throat. Cain's hand hovered near it and paused, asking permission without words. She nodded once. He unfastened it carefully and set it on the altar stone beside Darius's fallen crest, separating relic from ruin in one deliberate motion. The spring chamber lay beneath the temple, where moonlit water rose from black rock and flowed in a narrow circle around a carved platform. Steam silvered the air. Ancient glyphs pulsed faintly in the walls, no longer corrupted, breathing with the mountain's slow heartbeat. Isra remained at the threshold with the gray-veiled seer from Frostgate, and the healer with braided silver hair, now soot-smudged and stern as ever. The healer's gaze cut to Cain's reopened bandages and then to Anastasia's bloodied palm. "If either of you faints in my presence," she said dryly, "I will revive you out of spite." For one brief, startled beat, Anastasia laughed. It broke the last hard crust of terror in her chest. She stepped onto the platform. Cain removed his gloves and sword belt, then knelt in the shallow water before her, baring the strong line of his throat in formal submission. His voice lowered to reverence. "Anastasia Blackwood, moon-crowned by blood and witness, do I have your consent to claim and be claimed?" "Yes," she said, and felt the words settle into her bones like home. "With my whole will, yes." He bowed his head farther, giving her time to withdraw if fear returned. It did not. It transformed. She touched his face with both hands, thumbs brushing rain and ash from his skin. "Cain Valewood," she whispered, "do you consent to be mine as I am yours?" His eyes lifted to hers, amber brightening in the dim. "I do. Fully. Freely." When he rose, he moved as if approaching something sacred, not possessed. His hand cupped the back of her neck, warm and steady, and he pressed his brow to hers first, sharing breath. The bond between them tightened, not like a snare now, but like a bridge, taking weight and holding. Then his mouth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, and his bite came slow, controlled, a deliberate pressure that sharpened into pain and then into a rush so intense her knees nearly gave. Heat radiated from the mark in concentric waves. The first sting cracked open into wild brightness, and she felt him through the bond as clearly as pulse. His restraint, his awe, his fear of hurting her, his fierce relief that she had stayed. Gold and silver threads flared between their chests, visible even in the steam, weaving and reweaving until there was no clean edge where one began and the other ended. He released her skin and rested his forehead against her shoulder, voice frayed and full. "Mine," he breathed. Anastasia's fingers slid into his hair, anchoring herself in him. "Yours," she answered, and felt the water around their calves spark with moonlight. The rite required reciprocity. She turned him gently, lifted his chin, and traced the line just above his collar where pulse beat strong. "Hold still," she murmured, echoing the words she had once used to dress his wounds. His mouth curved with that brief, tired warmth she had come to trust, and he nodded. Her bite landed at his collar, firm enough to mark, and his sharp inhale shuddered through both of them. The bond surged again, this time deeper and wider, opening channels she had only sensed in fragments, his memories of sleepless command tents, the burden he had carried in secret rank, the quiet terror each time she vanished around a corner. Her own years of branded silence, the discipline of survival, the moment she chose to run with a ledger under her ribs and hope under ash. None of it diluted, all of it witnessed. Pain became heat, heat became clarity, clarity became a profound settling, like a storm finding its sea. Cain gripped her waist, not to control, to stay upright in the force of completion. Mate, he whispered against her temple, the word breaking into a laugh and then almost a sob. Mate, she echoed. The threads sealed in a final pulse that rolled through the chamber and up into the temple above. At the doorway, the seer gasped and pressed a hand to the wall where corrupted hairline cracks had mended to clean stone. Isra exhaled, long and unguarded, and lowered her head. The healer folded her arms, suspiciously damp-eyed, and pretended to study her satchel. Cain gathered Anastasia into his arms, and this time she let herself be held without bracing for impact. Their scents merged in the warm steam, cedar and storm rain braided with her own moon-cold wildflower note into one unmistakable signature. The frantic hum that had lived beneath her skin for years quieted. Not erased, quieted. A life she could inhabit. By dawn, the temple terraces filled again, not for war, but judgment and unbinding. Anastasia stood at the Moonwell dais in a clean, dark cloak, claim mark visible at her shoulder, while Cain took his place beside her wearing no disguise and no lesser insignia. Commander Isra read the War Council ruling in a carrying voice. Darius Stoneheart dead by lawful combat at the right site. Ash Creed declared traitorous cult order. All branded members to stand trial under unified pack law. Lieutenant Harrow's grievance record followed, formally confirming Cain's shelter clause invocation as lawful and censure permanent. Harrow himself stepped forward, removed his officer pin, and knelt. I chose fear over law, he said to Anastasia. I was wrong. Serve the rebuilding, she told him. That is your sentence, and your chance. The gray-veiled seers approached next, including the one from Frostgate who had trembled over the crystal lens. Before assembled packs, they demonstrated the forged vision braid and named the elders who had helped spread it under coercion. Those elders were taken into custody, alive. The external Raven report from Northwatch was entered into record, and messengers were dispatched at once with corrected Lawstone testimony bearing Anastasia's seal and Isra's command mark. No rumor remained unanswered. Then came the unbinding. Survivors of Ash brands lined the lower steps, wrists and throats marked by old runes. Anastasia took the stolen ledger from a cedar chest where she had placed it under guard, held it up for all to see, and handed it to the Seer Tribunal and archive clerks. Every name is evidence, she said. Every name is also a person. Find them. The oldest temple map followed, submitted beside it with her annotations of the servant catacombs and Stoneheart redrafts. Nothing hidden, nothing lost again. Moonwell light streamed through the lattice as she and Cain spoke the release litany together. One by one, the brands on the survivors dimmed, smoked, and faded to pale scars. Among those freed stood old Marta, ankle-wrapped, spine straight, who met Anastasia's gaze and gave a small, fierce nod that said she had survived long enough to see doctrine fail. The two children from Tunnel C waited near the front. The boy still held his wooden spoon, now polished and tucked in his belt like a ceremonial blade. When the light touched his wrist and found no mark to burn, he grinned up at Anastasia with complete trust. At full sunrise, the allied Alphas and Lunan bowed in a wide ring, while Isra set the moon-crowned diadem on Anastasia's head, and then turned to Cain with the Alpha circlet of unified command. Co-rulers, Isra declared, by blood right and bond, by law and witness. Cain did not place himself ahead of her. He took her hand and knelt with her before the people. Equal posture, equal vow. Anastasia drew the small carved wolf token from her pocket, the one left beside her cot when she still thought kindness was a trap, and closed his fingers around it. You gave me this when I had nothing, she said softly. He covered her hand with his. You gave me truth when it could have cost you everything. They sealed their private promise in public words, clear as morning bells. In war and in peace, I choose you. Before the sun cleared the highest ridge, the first reconstruction order was carried out at her command. Stoneheart Fortress was seized not for plunder but conversion. Its servant pens were broken open, its lower chapel stripped of collar racks, its archive kitchens remade into classrooms and training halls for low-born wolves, orphaned children, and escaped bondservants learning law, trade, and self-defense under guard they selected themselves. The healer took charge of the infirmary wing and bullied half the war camp into proper sanitation. Isra accepted appointment as High Marshal of the Border, finally saluting Cain without restraint and Anastasia without hesitation. No loaded glance remained unpaid. When the crowds thinned and the day's decrees were done, Anastasia and Cain stood together on the eastern parapet as wind moved through newly raised banners. The bond between them rested deep and steady, a living current neither demanded nor feared. Below, children raced across the courtyard stones that had once heard only orders and chains. Above, the moon faded into bright sky, no longer blood-red, simply present. Cain brushed his thumb over the mark at her shoulder and whispered, "Mine." She smiled into the wind, touched the mark at his collar, and answered, "Yours, mate."